The huge room on Nexus Prime was filled with noise and worry. Beings from many different worlds sat in their special seats, watching the big screens that showed terrible pictures. Ships exploded in space. Cities burned on distant planets. Millions of people ran for their lives as giant war machines swept down from the sky. Warlord Vexthar had struck again. This time he had destroyed 3 colony worlds in just 2 days. His massive ships, each one bigger than a small moon, had turned entire civilizations into dust and ash. The reptilian warrior was 9 feet tall with thick scales covering his body. Scars from countless battles marked his hide like a map of destruction. Everyone in the galaxy knew his name and feared it. Kate Morrison sat quietly in the Earth section, reading the reports on her tablet. She was 45 years old and had worked as a diplomat for 20 years. She had helped solve trade problems between planets and stopped small wars before they could start. But this was different. This was bigger and more dangerous than anything she had ever faced. The other Earth people with her looked scared. Lieutenant Commander Alex Bennett, her young assistant, kept checking his communication device for new messages. Each one brought worse news. The Catherian Empire was growing stronger every day, and no one seemed able to stop them. At the front of the Great Chamber, Council Chairman Zeflos called for quiet. He was tall and made of living crystal that changed colors when he was upset. Right now he was flashing red and orange, which meant he was very worried. His voice echoed through the room as he spoke to the hundreds of representatives. "Fellow beings," he said, "we face the greatest threat our galaxy has ever known. Warlord Vexthar has now destroyed 47 worlds. His demands grow bolder each day. He wants tribute from every system within 50 light years of his territory." Angry voices rose from all around the chamber. Some aliens were shouting in, languages Kate did not understand. Others were making clicking sounds or flashing bright lights to show their feelings. The universal translator in her ear worked hard to keep up with all the different ways of speaking. "We must evacuate the threatened worlds," called out Ambassador Thorkus from the Stellar Federation. He was a big blue creature with 6 arms, and all of them were waving as he talked. "There is no shame in retreat when facing such power. Evacuation is not enough," replied Minister Yexandra from the Trade Consortium. She looked like a giant butterfly but spoke with a voice like thunder. "Where will all these refugees go? We cannot feed and house billions of displaced beings." The hegemony representative, a tall gray alien with huge black eyes, stood up slowly. "My government has decided to seek separate peace with the Catherians. We will not risk our worlds for others who cannot defend themselves." This caused an uproar. Many smaller species began shouting at once. They knew that if the big powers made deals with Vexthar, the smaller worlds would be left defenseless. Kate watched it all with growing concern. The Galactic Council was falling apart just when unity was most needed. Alex leaned over to whisper in her ear. "Ambassador, we just got word from Earth Command. The colonies at New Austin and Port Liberty are directly in Vexthar's path. Our defense fleet is already moving to protect them, but..." He did not need to finish. Kate knew the numbers. Earth had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years. Their ships were good, but few in number. Against Vexithar's war machine, they would last maybe an hour in direct combat. On the screens around the chamber, new images appeared. These showed Vexthar himself, standing on the bridge of his flagship called Bone Crusher. He was even more frightening in person than in the old pictures. His yellow eyes glowed with cruel intelligence, and his mouth was full of sharp teeth. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding metal. "People of the galaxy," he said, "I am tired of your endless talking. You sit in your comfortable chambers and debate while worlds burn. I offer you one final chance. Surrender now, and some of you may live as my servants. Continue to resist, and I will turn every world you love into a tomb." The message ended, and the chamber fell silent. Even the angriest representatives had nothing to say after hearing those words. Kate looked around at the faces of beings from dozens of different species. She saw fear, despair, and resignation. No one believed they could win against Vexithar. Chairman Zeflos tried to restart the debate, but his heart was not in it. We need to discuss our options, he said weakly. Perhaps if we all work together? Work together? The voice came from Ambassador Krexnall of the warrior clans. He was covered in natural armor and carried ancient weapons even here in the peaceful council chamber. You soft-worlders do not understand war. Vexthar respects only strength. Everything else is weakness to him. Then what do you suggest? Asked Kate, speaking for the first time since the session began. Her voice was calm and clear, cutting through the noise and confusion. Krexnall looked at her with something like pity. Your species is young, human. You have not learned the hard truths of the galaxy yet. When faced with a predator like Vexthar, you have three choices. Fight and die quickly, run and die slowly, or surrender and live as slaves. Kate stood up from her seat. Around her, the other Earth representatives looked surprised. Alex tugged at her sleeve, trying to get her to sit back down, but she gently pulled away from him. There is a fourth option, she said clearly. The chamber became very quiet. Even, the universal translators seemed to pause as everyone waited to hear what the human diplomat would say next. We could try talking to him, Kate continued. Not surrendering, not begging, just talking, person to person. The reaction was immediate and loud. Some beings laughed, others made sounds of disbelief. A few looked angry that she would even suggest something so foolish. Krexnall shook his armored head sadly. Human, he said. Many have tried to negotiate with Vexthar. Their heads now decorate his trophy room. He does not talk. He only takes what he wants. Kate nodded respectfully. I understand the risks, but every other approach has failed. Military force has not stopped him. Evacuation only delays the problem. Surrender means the end of everything we have built here. She gestured toward the screens showing the destroyed worlds. Look at what we are choosing between. Is a small chance at peace not worth trying? Chairman Zeflos flickered through several colors before settling on a pale blue that meant deep thought. What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador Morrison? Kate took a deep breath. She knew that what she was about to say would change everything, not just for Earth but for the entire galaxy. I am proposing that I request a personal meeting with Warlord Vexthar, face to face, diplomat to warrior. The chamber erupted in chaos. Beings were shouting, clicking, flashing, and making every kind of noise their species could produce. Some called her brave. Others called her insane. A few demanded that Earth be expelled from the Council for suggesting something so dangerous. Through it all, Kate stood calmly in her place, waiting for the storm to pass. She had made her decision, and she would see it through no matter what happened next. The galaxy was about to learn what humans meant when they refused to give up hope. Even in the darkest hour, the news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. On every inhabited world, people stopped what they were doing to stare at their screens in shock. A human diplomat had volunteered to meet the most feared being in known space. Most thought she had lost her mind. In the communications center of Nexus Prime, reporters from dozens of species crowded around their equipment. The story was too big to ignore. Ambassador Kate Morrison from Earth, representing one of the newest members of the galactic community, was going to face Warlord Vexthar alone. This is insane, muttered Captain Ryan Brooks as he received his orders aboard the Earthship Defiance. He was a tough man with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes from years of staring into space. He had fought pirates and raiders, but nothing like this. They want me to fly the ambassador straight into the mouth of hell. His crew gathered around him in the ship's main meeting room. Chief Engineer Lisa Park, a small woman with oil-stained hands, shook her head in disbelief. Captain, this has to be some kind of mistake. No one just walks up to Vexthar and asks for a chat. Communications Officer Danny Walsh looked up from his console. Sir, I'm getting reports from all over. The betting houses are already taking odds. Most are giving the ambassador less than 10 minutes before she's dead. Ryan stood and walked to the big window that showed the stars outside. His ship was not the biggest or strongest in Earth's fleet, but it was fast and reliable. If they were going to deliver Kate to her meeting, they would need every advantage they could get. Orders are orders, he said finally. Get the ship ready. We leave for Kepler Station in 6 hours. Meanwhile, across the galaxy on his massive flagship, Warlord Vexthar was having his own meeting. The bone crusher was so large that small ships could land inside its docking bays. The walls were covered with weapons taken from defeated enemies and the bones of those who had dared to challenge him. His lieutenant, Korthak, was a smaller version of his master but just as deadly. The younger Catherian's scales were darker, and his eyes burned with eager violence. "My lord," he said, "why waste time with this human? Let me destroy their ship before it reaches the meeting point." Vexthar sat on his throne made from the hull of the first ship he had ever captured. Around him, holographic displays showed the positions of his vast fleet. Thousands of warships waited for his command to continue their path of destruction across the galaxy. "No," the warlord said slowly. "I am curious about these humans. They are new to space, yet they dare to challenge me. Their military is weak, but they have something else." "What could they possibly have that interests you, my lord?" Vexithar's yellow eyes glowed brighter. "Courage. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. I have conquered races that were older and stronger than these humans. None of them ever asked to meet me face to face." The great warlord stood and walked to a window that showed the stars. His empire controlled hundreds of worlds, but he always wanted more. That was the Catherian way. Take what you need and then take what you want. "Besides," he continued, "this meeting will be useful. I can study their diplomat, learn their weaknesses. When I finally attack their worlds, I will know exactly how to break their spirits." Korthak bowed his head. "As you wish, my lord. What are your terms for this meeting?" A cruel smile spread across Vexthar's face. "The meeting will take place on Sigma Colony. Let the humans see what happens to those who oppose me. She will come alone, unarmed, and the entire galaxy will watch as I show them the price of defiance." Back on Earth, Kate Morrison sat in her apartment, looking out at the blue sky and green fields of her homeworld. She had grown up on a farm not far from here, where her father had taught her that sometimes the hardest problems needed the simplest solutions. Her communication device buzzed with messages from all over Earth. Government officials wanted to talk her out of the mission. Military leaders said she was throwing her life away for nothing. Friends and family begged her to reconsider, but Kate had studied every report about Vexthar and his empire. She had read about the worlds he had destroyed and the millions who had died. More importantly, she had read about the Catherian people themselves. There were things in those reports that others had missed, details that might make all the difference. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Alex Bennett, her young assistant. He looked worried and tired, like he had not slept in days. "Ambassador," he said, "I have the final details about the meeting. Vexithar has agreed, but..." "But what?" Kate asked, leading him inside. Alex sat down heavily in a chair. "He wants the meeting to take place on Sigma Colony. That's the world he destroyed last month. 2 million people lived there, and now it's just ruins and radiation." Kate nodded slowly. She had expected something like this. Vexthar wanted to intimidate her before they even met. "What else?" "You have to go alone. No weapons, no guards, no backup. The whole thing will be broadcast live across the galaxy." He's calling it a battle of wills. "A battle of wills," Kate repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting choice of words." Alex leaned forward urgently. "Ambassador, please reconsider this. The man is a monster. He has killed billions of beings without showing any mercy. What makes you think you can reason with someone like that?" Kate walked to her bookshelf and pulled out an old volume about Earth's history. It was filled with stories of wars and conflicts that had seemed impossible to solve. "Alex, do you know what the most successful peace negotiations in human history have in common?" "No, ma'am. They all happened when someone was willing to see their enemy as a person instead of a monster. The moment you stop seeing someone as human, you stop being able to talk to them." "But Vexthar isn't human," Alex pointed out. Kate smiled. "No, but he is a person. He thinks, he feels, he makes choices. That means there might be a way to reach him." The next day, Kate boarded the Defiance for the journey to Kepler Station. Captain Brooks met her at the airlock, his expression grim, but respectful. "Ambassador," he said, "I want you to know that my crew and I think what you're doing takes real guts. We'll get you there safely, I promise." "Thank you, Captain. I know this isn't easy for any of you." As the ship left Earth's orbit, Kate looked back at her home world one last time. She might never see it again, but she had to try. Too many lives depended on finding a peaceful solution to this crisis. Throughout the galaxy, the news networks continued their coverage. Experts debated whether the human diplomat was brave or simply foolish. Military analysts studied Vexithar's past encounters, trying to predict what would happen when they finally met. On the Outer Rim worlds, families packed their belongings and prepared to flee if the meeting went badly. They knew that if Kate failed, nothing would stop the Catherian war machine from sweeping across the galaxy like a plague of destruction. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change the course of galactic history. A human diplomat with nothing but words and hope would face a warlord who had never known defeat. The entire galaxy held its breath and waited to see which would prove stronger, the power of destruction or the possibility of peace. Sigma Colony had once been a beautiful world. Green forests covered the hills, and crystal blue oceans reflected the light of twin suns. Cities filled with art and music had been home to 2 million beings from many different species. Children had played in parks while their parents worked in laboratories and schools. Now it was a graveyard. Kate Morrison looked out the window of her shuttle as it descended toward the planet's surface. Twisted metal stuck up from the ground like broken bones. What had once been buildings were now piles of melted glass and stone. The oceans had turned brown from all the ash and debris floating in them. The radiation levels were still high, but not deadly for a short visit. Kate wore a simple gray suit with a small device on her belt that would protect her from the worst of the contamination. She carried only a datapad containing her notes and a small water bottle. "Are you sure about this, Ambassador?" asked the shuttle pilot, a young woman named Jenny Cole. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke. "We could still turn around." "I'm sure," Kate replied calmly. "Take me to the courthouse ruins as planned." The courthouse had been the center of justice for the entire planet. It was where beings from all over Sigma Colony had come to solve their problems peacefully. Now its great dome was cracked open like an egg, and its walls were covered with blast marks from Catherian weapons. Kate's shuttle landed on what had once been a beautiful plaza. She could see the remains of fountains and statues that had celebrated peace and cooperation between different species. Now they were just broken stone covered in radioactive dust. As she stepped out of the shuttle, Kate felt the weight of millions of eyes watching her. The meeting was being broadcast live across the galaxy. On every civilized world, beings were gathered around their screens to watch what many believed would be her final moments. In the distance, she could see Vexthar's personal shuttle approaching. It was black as space and shaped like a weapon itself. When it landed, the ground shook from its massive weight. Steam rose from its engines as they cooled in the poisoned air. Kate walked slowly toward the courthouse steps and sat down on what remained of the marble stairs. She opened her datapad and began to read through her notes one final time. Around her, the dead planet was completely silent except for the wind blowing through the ruins. The door of the Catherian shuttle opened with a loud hiss. First came the guards, 6 of Vexthar's most trusted warriors. They were smaller than their leader, but still impressive. With thick armor and weapons that could cut through steel, they spread out in a protective circle, their yellow eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Then came Vexthar himself. Even expecting it, Kate was struck by how truly massive he was. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, the Warlord was a mountain of muscle and scales. His armor was made from the bones of creatures he had killed, polished to a bright white shine. Weapons hung from his belt and more were strapped to his back and arms, but it was his presence that was most overwhelming. This was a being who had destroyed worlds with a word, who had caused the death of billions without showing any regret. When he walked, the very ground seemed to tremble beneath his feet. Kate looked up at him as he approached and did something that shocked everyone watching across the galaxy. She smiled. Not a nervous smile or a frightened grin, but a warm, genuine smile like she was greeting an old friend. She stood up slowly and extended her hand toward him in the universal human gesture of greeting. Vexthar stopped in his tracks, clearly confused. His guards raised their weapons slightly, unsure how to react to this strange behavior. The warlord stared at Kate's outstretched hand as if it were some kind of weapon he did not recognize. "Hello," Kate said simply. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. My name is Kate Morrison." For several long seconds, nothing happened. Vexithar continued to stare at her hand while his guards looked back and forth between their leader and the small human woman. Across the galaxy, billions of beings held their breath. Finally, Vexthar spoke. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "You are either very brave or very stupid, human." Kate lowered her hand but kept smiling. "Probably a little of both. Would you like to sit down? I find that conversations go better when people are comfortable." She gestured toward the courthouse steps. The idea of the great warlord Vexthar sitting casually on some ruins to chat with a diplomat was so absurd that some of his guards actually looked confused. "I did not come here to chat," Vexthar growled. "I came to show the galaxy what happens to those who waste my time with pointless words." Instead of looking scared, Kate nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. You have important work to do, conquering worlds and expanding your empire. But since we're both here, and since the whole galaxy is watching, why don't we at least talk for a few minutes?" Without waiting for an answer, she sat back down on the steps and patted the stone beside her. "I've been reading about your campaigns. Very impressive. The Battle of Proxima 7 especially. The way you outflanked 3 different fleets at once showed real tactical genius." Vexthar blinked in surprise. No one had ever complimented his military skills during a negotiation before. Usually his enemies begged for mercy or tried to threaten him with their own forces. "You studied my battles?" he asked, his voice less harsh than before. "Of course, I always research the people I'm going to meet. You have quite a reputation as a strategic thinker. Some of your victories seemed impossible until I looked at the details." Kate opened her datapad and showed him some of the battle maps she had been studying. "This maneuver at Rigel Station, for example. You used the planet's gravity well to slingshot your ships around the defender's line." Brilliant. Despite himself, Vexthar found himself looking at the tactical display. He had been proud of that particular victory, and it had been years since anyone had appreciated the clever thinking behind it. "The defenders thought they had me trapped," he said, stepping closer to see the screen better. "They did not understand that sometimes the best way forward is to go backward first." "Exactly," Kate agreed enthusiastically. "That's what caught my attention about your campaigns. You don't just use brute force. You think several moves ahead, like a chess player." Vexthar's guards were now thoroughly confused. Their master was discussing strategy with the enemy instead of simply killing her. This was not how these meetings usually went. Kate continued talking, her voice calm and friendly. "You know, that reminds me of something my father used to say. He was a farmer back on Earth, but he had been a soldier in our last big war." "Your father was a warrior?" Vexithar asked, genuinely curious now. "He was. He fought in what we called the Unity War, the final conflict that ended fighting between Earth's nations. He used to tell me stories about the battles, but what I remember most is what he said about peace." Kate looked out over the ruins of Sigma Colony, her expression thoughtful. "He said that the strongest warriors were not the ones who won every fight, but the ones who knew when not to fight at all." Vexithar was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the dead world waited in silence, while the galaxy watched and wondered what would happen next. The warlord, who had never been defeated in battle, was listening to a human diplomat talk about her father's wisdom. And for the first time in decades, Vexthar found himself genuinely interested in what another being had to say. Kate continued to speak in her calm, gentle voice while the galaxy watched in amazement. The feared warlord Vexthar, destroyer of worlds, was actually listening to her stories about her childhood on Earth. His guards stood frozen, unsure what to do when their master was not acting like his usual terrifying self. "My father grew up during the worst time in Earth's history," Kate said, looking at the broken stones around them. Different groups of humans were fighting each other over everything. Land, resources, beliefs. The wars seemed like they would never end. Vexthar found himself sitting down on the courthouse steps without really meaning to. Something about the human's voice made him want to hear more. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to him like a normal person instead of a monster to be feared. "What happened?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Kate smiled. "People got tired of dying. They realized that fighting over scraps was making everyone weaker. So they started talking instead. It took time, but eventually they found ways to share what they had instead of taking from each other." Sharing. Vexthar repeated the word like it was foreign to him. "Cytherians do not share. We take what we need to survive." "I know," Kate said quietly. "I've been reading about your people's history. Not just the conquest records that everyone talks about, but the real history, the old stories and legends that your people used to tell." Vexithar's yellow eyes narrowed. "What old stories?" "There are no stories before the Great Exodus, before we became warriors." Kate pulled up a different file on her datapad. "Actually, there are. I found them in the archives on 3 different worlds. Fragments of Cytherian poetry, songs, even children's stories. They were scattered and broken, but when you put the pieces together, they tell a very different story about your people." The warlord leaned forward despite himself. "Show me." Kate turned the screen so he could see it. The text was in ancient Cytherian symbols that glowed softly on the display. "This is a poem about the gardens of your homeworld. It talks about crystal trees that sang in the wind and flowers that changed color with the seasons." Vexthar stared at the words. He recognized some of them from his earliest memories, fragments of songs his mother had sung to him before the raids began, before everything changed. "This cannot be real," he said, but his voice was uncertain now. "There's more," Kate continued gently. "Stories about Cytherian explorers who traveled to new worlds not to conquer them, but to learn from them. Scientists who shared their discoveries with other species. Artists who created beautiful things just because they loved beauty." She scrolled through more files. "Your people were builders once, Vexthar. They created wonders that made the galaxy a better place. And your name, in the old language, it means keeper of memories. Did you know that?" The great warlord was very quiet now. His guards were shifting nervously, not understanding what was happening to their leader. Across the galaxy, military experts were trying to figure out what the human diplomat was doing that no weapon had been able to accomplish. "That is impossible," Vexthar said finally, but his voice was barely above a whisper. "We have always been warriors. It is our nature." Kate shook her head. "No, it became your nature. There's a difference." She showed him another file. "This is a report from the Galactic survey team that found your homeworld after it was destroyed. The cosmic disaster that hit your planet was not natural. Something went wrong with the star itself." The images on the screen showed a dead world, burned and lifeless. Where once there had been cities and gardens, now there was only ash and radiation. It looked very much like Sigma Colony did now. "Your people had to leave everything behind," Kate continued. "Their homes, their culture, their way of life. They became refugees floating in space with nowhere to go. But the galaxy was different. Then, other species were not as welcoming as they are now. Your people were turned away from world after world." Vexthar's breathing had become heavy. The memories he had buried for so long were starting to surface. The hunger, the cold of space, the way other species looked at his people like they were dangerous animals. "So they had to take what they needed to survive," Kate said softly. "One raid to get food and fuel, then another to find a place to rest. Each time it got a little easier to take instead of ask. Each time they had to become a little harder, a little more ruthless." The warlord stood up suddenly, his massive frame shaking with emotion. "Stop," he commanded, but his voice cracked as he said it. Kate did not stop. She could see that her words were reaching something deep inside him, something that had been locked away for centuries. The children born on the ships never knew about the gardens or the crystal trees. They only knew about survival and conquest. Each generation forgot a little more about what your people used to be. "Stop," Vexithar roared. But there were tears in his yellow eyes now. His guards raised their weapons, thinking their leader was finally ready to kill the human diplomat. But Vexithar held up one massive hand to stop them. He was staring at Kate like she had just shown him something impossible. "How?" he asked quietly. "How do you know these things? The old stories were lost long ago." Kate closed her datapad and looked directly into his eyes. "Because I spent months searching for them. I talked to historians and archaeologists on dozens of worlds. I read through archives that hadn't been opened in centuries. I wanted to understand who you really were before I met you." "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Because I don't believe anyone is born evil," Kate said simply. "I believe that good people sometimes have to do terrible things to survive, and I believe that even the worst situations can be fixed if someone is willing to try." Vexthar sank back down onto the steps, his great head in his hands. For the first time in his adult life, he was remembering what it felt like to be something other than a conqueror. The weight of all the worlds he had destroyed, all the lives he had taken, seemed to crash down on him at once. "What have I become?" he whispered. Kate moved a little closer, her voice gentle but firm. "You became what you had to become to keep your people alive, but that doesn't have to be what you stay." The guards were completely confused now. Some of them had never seen their leader show any emotion except anger. The idea that he might be capable of regret or sadness was beyond their understanding. "The beings I have killed," Vexthar said, staring at his hands. "The worlds I have destroyed. How can such things ever be forgiven?" "I don't know," Kate admitted honestly. "But I know that more killing won't bring them back. More destruction won't undo what's been done. The only way forward is to stop and try to do better." Vexthar looked up at her, and for a moment he was not the terror of the galaxy. He was just a person who had lost his way and didn't know how to find it again. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Kate smiled, and in that smile was hope for the future that neither of them could yet imagine. "I want to make you an offer," she said. "A chance for your people to remember what they used, to be and maybe become something even better." The galaxy held its breath and waited to hear what would come next. Kate Morrison stood up slowly and faced the most feared being in the galaxy. Vexithar was no longer the terrifying warlord who had destroyed countless worlds. He was a broken person trying to understand how his life had gone so wrong. His guards were still confused, not knowing whether to protect their leader or arrest the human who had somehow broken him with nothing but words. "Here is what I propose," Kate said clearly, making sure her voice would be heard by every being watching across the galaxy. "Earth and its allies will give your people what they have been searching for all these centuries. Empty worlds that can be turned into new homes. Resources to help rebuild your civilization. Technology to heal the damage that has been done." Vexthar looked up at her with suspicion. "And what do you want in return? What price do you demand for such generosity?" Kate smiled. "We want you to remember who you used to be. We want the Catherians to become explorers and builders again instead of destroyers. Your people have knowledge and skills that could help the whole galaxy grow stronger. You would trust us after everything we have done?" Vexthar asked in disbelief. "I would trust you to choose a better path if someone shows you that such a path exists," Kate replied. "Right now, your people believe that conquest is the only way to survive. What if they learned there was another way?" The great warlord was quiet for a long time. Around them, the ruins of Sigma Colony stood as proof of the destruction he had caused. But for the first time in centuries, he was thinking about creation instead of destruction. "The other warlords will not agree to this," he said finally. "Many of my people have known nothing but war for their entire lives. They will see any talk of peace as weakness." Kate nodded. "That's why it has to start with you. You are the strongest among them. If you choose a different path, others will follow. Not all of them, maybe not even most of them at first. But some will." She gestured to the broken courthouse behind them. This building was once a place where different species came together to solve their problems peacefully. We could build something like it again, but better. A place where your people and mine could work together instead of fighting. Vexthar stood and walked to where the great dome of the courthouse had once risen toward the sky. Now it was cracked and open to the poisoned air, but he could imagine what it had looked like when it was whole. "You really believe this could work?" he asked. "I believe it's worth trying," Kate said. "What's the alternative? You continue conquering until there's nothing left to conquer? Your people become so feared that every other species in the galaxy unites against them. Where does that path lead?" The warlord turned back to face her. For a moment his expression was unreadable. Then slowly, he began to remove his armor. Piece by piece, the bone plates that had made him look so terrifying fell to the ground. Underneath he was still massive and powerful, but he looked more like a person and less like a monster. "I accept your proposal," he said simply. The word sent shockwaves across the galaxy. On 1,000 different worlds, beings stared at their screens in amazement. The war that everyone had thought would destroy civilization was ending not with a great battle, but with a conversation on the ruins of a dead world. But not everyone was happy with this news. In the Catherian fleet orbiting above Sigma Colony, several ship captains were furious. Lieutenant Korthak contacted his leader immediately. "My lord," his voice crackled through the communication device. "Surely you cannot be serious about this human's offer. We are warriors, not farmers and builders." Vexthar looked up at the sky where his ships waited. "Korthak, how many worlds have we conquered in the last 50 years? Hundreds, my lord. We have brought glory to the Catherian name. And how many of our people are truly happy?" Vexthar asked quietly. "How many children grow up dreaming of something other than war?" There was silence from the communication device. Korthak had never thought about such questions before. I'm ordering the fleet to stand down," Vexthar continued. "Any captain who wishes to continue raiding on his own may leave now and never return. Those who wish to try something new will follow me to the coordinates Ambassador Morrison provides." The next few weeks were the most tense in galactic history. Some Catherian ships did break away from the main fleet, their captains choosing to continue their lives as raiders rather than trust in peace. But most stayed with Vexthar, curious to see what this new path might bring. Kate worked day and night with Earth's government and their allies to find suitable worlds for Catherian settlement. They chose planets that were rich in resources but uninhabited, places where the former warriors could build new lives without displacing anyone else. The first joint colony was established on Sigma Colony itself. Admiral Sam Tucker of Earth's Stellar Navy worked with Catherian engineers to clean up the radiation and begin rebuilding. What had once been a symbol of destruction slowly became a symbol of hope. Dr. Amy Chen led teams of scientists from both species to develop new farming techniques that could work on damaged worlds. The Catherians had learned many things about survival in harsh conditions during their centuries of wandering. Combined with Earth's knowledge of growing food, they created gardens that could bloom even in poisoned soil. The work was not easy. Many beings from other species were angry that the Catherians were being helped instead of punished for their crimes. Some Earth colonists were afraid to live near former raiders. There were fights and misunderstandings almost every day. But slowly, things began to change. Human children played with young Catherians in the rebuilt parks of Sigma Colony. Former warriors learned to use their strength to build houses instead of tearing them down. Scientists from both species made discoveries that benefited everyone. Vexthar himself became something no one had ever expected, a protector instead of a destroyer. When pirates attacked trade routes in the Outer Rim, it was Catherian ships that drove them away. When natural disasters struck colony worlds, Catherian rescue teams were often the first to arrive. The galaxy learned to see the Catherians not as monsters, but as people who had lost their way and found it again. Other conflicts that had seemed impossible to solve were settled using Kate's methods, talking, listening, and trying to understand the real reasons behind the fighting. 5 years after the meeting on Sigma Colony, Kate returned to the world for a special ceremony. Where the old courthouse had stood in ruins, A new building rose toward the sky. It was made from both human and Catherian materials, a symbol of what could be accomplished when different peoples worked together. Vexithar was there too, no longer wearing armor but dressed in simple clothes like any other citizen. He had become the elected leader of the joint colonies chosen by both humans and Catherians, who trusted him to guide their shared future. "Do you ever regret it?" Kate asked him as they stood together watching children play in the gardens that had grown from the ashes of war. "Regret what?" Vexthar asked. "Giving up your empire, choosing peace over conquest." The former warlord smiled, an expression that would have seemed impossible 5 years earlier. "I regret that it took me so long to remember who my people used to be, but I do not regret choosing to become who we could be." Above them, the new dome of the courthouse reflected the light of twin suns. Inside, representatives from dozens of species worked together to solve problems with words instead of weapons. The building had a name carved above its entrance in many different languages: the Morrison Center for Galactic Peace. Kate had returned to Earth as a hero, but she preferred to remember the moment when fear had been replaced by hope. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon was not a ship or a gun, but the willingness to see an enemy as a friend who had not been given the chance to prove it yet.